My name is Jacob, and I'm 33 years old. I've spent most of my adult life trying to logic my way through things. Balance sheets, mortgage rates, the best route to avoid morning traffic. I like things that make sense. But there's one thing in my life that defies every ounce of that logic. A memory that feels less like a recollection and more like a splinter lodged deep in my mind. It's about my grandfather's house, and the thing that lived in the walls. This was back in the late 90s. I was about 11. My grandfather lived out in the sticks, in an old, two-story farmhouse that had been in the family for generations. It was the kind of place that smelled of pine sol, mothballs, and silence. A heavy silence. The woods pressed in on it from all sides, and at night, the darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the frantic scramble of a raccoon in the gutters. The house itself had a personality. It creaked and settled with a voice of its own. Floorboards groaned in specific sequences. The wind whistled a particular tune through a crack in the attic window, and the old plumbing sang a chorus of knocks and gurgles every time you ran the water. You learned its language. That's the first thing you have to understand. You learned what was just the house, and what wasn't. Because there was another sound. We called it the between sound. It didn't happen often. Maybe once a month, if that. It always occurred in the dead of night, in that profound quiet between the house's usual nightly noises. It would start as a faint scratching. Not the skittering of a mouse in the walls. We had those, and this was different. This was slower, more deliberate. Like someone gently dragging a single fingernail along the interior of the plaster. Then would come the humming. A low, tuneless hum, vibration more than melody. It wasn't a happy sound or a sad sound. It was just a sound. A presence. It seemed to emanate from the space between the walls themselves, a hollow, resonant noise that made the fillings in my teeth ache. The first time I heard it, I shot straight up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I lay there, frozen, listening to this awful, intimate noise that seemed to be coming from right behind my headboard. I wanted to scream for my parents, who were sleeping down the hall, but my throat was sealed shut with pure, undiluted fear. After what felt like an eternity, it stopped. The scratching ceased, the humming faded, and the normal night sounds of the house timidly returned. I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, over bowls of sugar pops, my voice trembling, I asked my grandfather about the noise in the walls. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. He just got very still for a moment, then took a slow sip of his black coffee. "That's just the house, Jake," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Old houses talk. Don't you mind it?" But I did mind. And I could see in the tightness around his eyes that he minded too. This wasn't a subject for discussion. It was a family rule, unspoken but understood. We don't talk about the between sound. The second time it happened, I was braver. Or more foolish. The scratching started again, this time from the wall adjacent to my closet. The humming followed, a bit louder this time, a droning bass note that seemed to push against the air in my room. Instead of hiding under the covers, I did something unthinkable. I slowly, silently slid out of bed. On my hands and knees, I crept toward the wall. The floorboards were cold against my palms. The humming grew more intense the closer I got, vibrating through the floor. I pressed my ear against the flower-patterned wallpaper. The sound didn't get louder. It got clearer. And I realized it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming through it. Like the wall was just a veil, and on the other side was the source. And in that moment of terrifying clarity, I heard something new. A whisper, so faint it was almost subliminal, woven into the fabric of the hum. "No, you're there." I scrambled backwards so fast I hit my head on the bed frame. I spent the rest of the night with the blankets pulled over my head, praying for sunrise. I never told anyone what I heard. Who would have believed me? But my curiosity, once ignited, was a fire that fear couldn't put out. I started looking for clues. I'd sneak into the basement and stare up at the network of pipes and wires between the floor joists of the first floor. I'd brave the dusty, spiderweb-choked attic, looking for any hole, any crevice that might lead to the spaces between. I found nothing. Just insulation, dust, and the skeletons of long-dead flies. The last time I ever heard the between sound was the last summer I spent at that house. I was 13. I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all, that it was just the overactive imagination of a scared kid. I was wrong. It started around 2 a.m. But this time, it was different. There was no gentle scratching lead-in. The humming began immediately, loud and urgent, thrumming through the entire house. I could feel it in the bones of the bed frame. It was a sound of distress, of panic. And then came the voice. Not a whisper, but a clear, desperate plea. It was genderless, ageless, and thick with a static-like quality, as if it was being transmitted from a million miles away. The door is closing. The door is closing. Please, see me. The words were followed by a frantic, scrabbling sound, like an animal trapped in a cage. I was paralyzed, caught between the instinct to flee and a bizarre, overwhelming surge of empathy. This thing, whatever it was terrified. Without thinking, acting on an impulse I still don't understand, I did the only thing I could. I sat up in bed, looked directly at the wall where the sound was loudest, and I said, in a shaky voice, "I see you." The noise stopped. The humming, the scratching, the voice. It all cut off into a silence so complete it was deafening. The old house itself seemed to be holding its breath. And then, right in front of me, the wallpaper bulged. It wasn't a big bulge. Just a small, outward push, the size of a fingertip, right at my eye level. The vintage floral pattern stretched and distorted for a single second. Then it sank back into place, smooth and perfect, as if nothing had happened. A wave of cold washed over me. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the spot until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the window. I never heard the between sound again. We visited Grandpa many times after that, and the house was just a house. It creaked, it settled, it made its noises. But the presence was gone. The door, whatever it was, had closed. My grandfather passed away a few years ago. We had to empty the house to sell it. I was the one who cleaned out the attic. And there, tucked behind a trunk full of old clothes, I found it. A single, yellowed piece of paper, covered in my grandfather's precise handwriting. It wasn't a letter. It was a log. Dates, times. July 12, 1972. Heard it in the guest room. Lasted 3 minutes. January 4th, 1975. Kitchen wall. The voice said cold dot. August 23rd, 1998. Jacob's room. It spoke to him. It's getting stronger. At the bottom of the page, written in a shakier script, as if by a much older man, was a final line. It wasn't a monster. It was just lost. I think it found its way home. I keep that paper in my desk drawer. I look at it sometimes, when the world of spreadsheets and traffic jams feels too solid, too real. It reminds me that the map of our reality is still mostly blank, filled with strange, lonely corners and doors that sometimes open, and sometimes close for good. My name is Jacob, I'm 33 years old, and I believe. Not in ghosts, not in demons, but in the things that are stuck in the spaces between. And sometimes, all they need is for someone to see them. My name is Michael, and I'm 22. Most people my age are worried about finishing college or starting their first real job. Me? I'm worried about the rain. Not the rain itself, but what sometimes comes with it. What my grandma used to call the soakers. It all started with a summer job back when I was 17. I needed cash for a beat-up car I was desperate to buy, so I took the only thing available in our small, rain-sodden town, a groundskeeper at the old Oak Haven Cemetery. It wasn't as creepy as it sounds. Most days it was just mowing lawns, trimming hedges around headstones, and enjoying the quiet. The cemetery was ancient, full of weeping angels and moss-covered obelisks, but in the sunlight, it was almost peaceful. My boss was an old guy named Frank, who'd been tending to Oak Haven for 40 years. He had a rule, delivered on my first day with a gravity that seemed ridiculous at the time. "Kid," he said, pointing a gnarled finger at the gray sky. "You see those clouds gathering? You feel that first drop? You drop whatever you're doing. You don't tie to your tools. You don't put the mower away. You run. You get to the shed, and you lock the door. You don't come out until the rain has fully stopped. Not eased up. Stopped." I laughed. I thought he was messing with the new guy. "What, afraid I'll melt?" I asked. Frank's face didn't crack a smile. "No. Afraid you won't." The first few times it rained, I followed the rule. I'd sprint to the small, wooden tool shed at the center of the cemetery, duck inside, and listen to the drumming on the roof. It was boring, but Frank was a good boss, so I humored him. Then, one Tuesday in late July, I was on the far north end, near the oldest plots from the 1800s. The sky turned that sickly green-gray color, and the wind picked up, whispering through the pine trees. I knew I had about 2 minutes before the heavens opened. But I was so close to finishing a row of edging. Just a few more feet. I decided to risk it. How bad could a little rain be? I'd get wet. Big deal. The first drops were fat and cold, splattering on the marble headstones. I kept working. Then the downpour began in earnest, a solid sheet of water that reduced the world to a gray, shimmering haze. I was soaked through in seconds. I sighed, finally admitting defeat, and started packing up my tools. That's when I saw him. Through the veil of rain, about 50 feet away, stood a man. He was pale, unnaturally so, like porcelain. He wore what looked like old-fashioned clothes, a dark, heavy coat and trousers, all drenched, water streaming from him as if he just walked out of a lake. He was just standing there, between two grand mausoleums, perfectly still, staring at me. My blood went cold. It wasn't the surprise of seeing another person, it was the way he was standing. He was too still. And his eyes, even from that distance through the rain, they looked empty. Like holes poked in paper. Logic kicked in. Maybe a mourner? A weirdo? I gave a weak, awkward wave. "Hey! You okay? Bad day to be out." The man didn't move. He didn't wave back. He didn't blink. Then, he took a step forward. And another. His movement was all wrong. It wasn't a walk. It was a glide, a smooth, lurching motion as if he were being pulled along on wires. And he was completely silent. The pounding rain should have masked his footsteps, but the sheer absence of any sound from his movement was deafening. Panic, pure and primal, finally overrode my stupidity. I dropped my edger. I turned and I ran. I didn't run for the gate. I ran for the shed. Frank's rule screamed in my head. The gravel path was slick, and I slipped, scrambling back to my feet, my heart trying to burst out of my chest. I dared to look back. He was still there. Gliding. and he was closer. Much closer. The rain poured off him in rivers, but his clothes looked heavy, sodden, like they'd been wet for 100 years. His face was a blank mask of terrible, patient hunger. I slammed shoulder first into the toolshed door, fumbled with the latch, and fell inside, kicking the door shut and throwing the bolt. I sat there on the dusty floor, gasping for air, soaked and trembling. I froze. It was a gentle knocking on the shed door. Not a fist. It sounded like fingertips. A low, watery voice seeped through the wood, so quiet I almost thought I was imagining it. It sounded like someone trying to speak with a mouth full of river water. "So cold out here. Let me in. Share the warmth." I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling my knees to my chest, and didn't make a sound. I prayed for the rain to stop. The knocking continued for what felt like an hour. A soft, persistent, maddening tapping on every side of the shed. Sometimes on the door, sometimes on the walls, sometimes right above my head on the roof. That watery voice would whisper, promising warmth, company, shelter. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rain stopped. The tapping ceased. The whispering ended. The only sound was the dripping of water from the trees onto the roof. I waited another 10 minutes, too terrified to move. Finally, I slowly, carefully, unbolted the door and peeked out. The sun was breaking through the clouds. The cemetery steamed. It was empty. There was no sign of the man. But where he had been standing, where he had glided across the path, the ground was dry. In the middle of the rain-soaked earth, there were trails of completely dry gravel, as if something impossibly, desiccatingly cold had passed over it and sucked all the moisture away. I never broke Frank's rule again. When I finally got the courage to ask him about it, he just nodded slowly, his eyes old and tired. "The soakers," he said, lighting a pipe with a trembling hand. "They don't come with every rain. Just the cold ones. The lonely ones. They're not ghosts. Ghosts are memories. These are echoes. Echoes of people who drowned, who were lost at sea, in rivers, in floods. The rain is a door for them. A temporary one. They're so cold, son. They've been cold for so long. And they want nothing more than to get in, to get dry, to share your warmth. But you can't let them in, Michael. Because if you do, they'll pour all their cold, all their centuries of drowning, right into you. And you'll have to go looking for warmth too." I quit the job a week later. I got a job flipping burgers instead. But I never forgot. And now, whenever it rains, a real downpour, the kind that gets under your skin, I find myself looking out the window. I check the locks twice. And I watch the streets. Sometimes, just sometimes, in the blur of a storm, I'll see a figure standing under a streetlight. Pale. Still. Dripping with a wetness that never seems to end. Just standing there. Waiting. Hoping someone will be foolish enough, kind enough, to invite them in out of the cold. My name is Michael, I'm 22 years old, and I'm still afraid of the rain.